Gerry Beckley, welcome back to Australian Musician.
Thank you. Good to be back.
You've got a wonderful new solo album out called Aurora. Just before we talk about that, you're back on the road with America, catching up again with that 50th anniversary tour that you started so long ago. I imagine there are still pandemic protocols on the road at the moment. How different is it touring in 2022?
Well, we're still all masked. You know, we mask and flying, and backstage needs to be proof of vax and mask. But as you know, we're in another round of another variant and stuff. So stuff's still happening. We did have to bring it to a close. A couple of weekends we missed. Once our drummer was sick, and another of the lead guitarist. But having said that, we've been pretty fortunate because it's almost a weekly story you hear of somebody that's had to, punt for Mick having Jagger, a month or so ago, right?
Yeah. As I said, you have this beautiful new album out called Aurora. Aurora is a track on the album. Why did you make that the title track?
Well, I kind of like the idea that it's got a visual element to it. But the other thing that's somewhat unique about this record is it's the first batch of new material in a long time. So it was kind of a new light, new spark. One of the pluses, one of the few of the whole COVID thing was I built a studio in Sydney, which I never had there before. And having that many months off, it was lovely. I mean, as you know, it's my home and stuff, but I didn't really have recording equipment there. And so I did this time, and I ended up, after a year and a half, I had at least an album, about 40 things. I was busy.
Yeah, it says in the press release that, excuse me, some of these songs go back to demos from the 70s. Were those ideas on cassettes, reel-to-reel tapes? How do you store those ideas?
All of the above. It's a little bit tricky because sometimes it might just be the spark of an idea. I tell you, one of the things, like I said, this album has a lot more new material, which it does. Over half was written kind of from scratch. But I always have a big bucket of parts and bits that were just never quite finished. And the last few albums had been a little bit more kind of going through that backlog of material. In this case, because I had 14 or 16 months, I had the time to really focus. Certain songs were like, okay, that's great, but it's the wrong key. I got to completely rebuild it or something. I mean, there were things that me having the time gave me the freedom to actually really address. So a lot of them, even though they might be really old when they started, they were like new to me because I kind of reevaluated.
Yeah. So did you get some nice surprises?
Yeah. I've learned that Leonard Cohen was a genius for putting everything about an octave lower than you would have imagined. We all used to write at the very top of our vocal range, and that was one thing that I realized is none of us can quite hit those notes like we used to. But you adapt to do what you can.
Yeah. Do you intentionally try to make a point of difference with your solo material to the American material, or does it just happen naturally?
It happens naturally. I write a lot, and I always say you have to write 10 to get 2, my equation. But it doesn't mean that the other 8 are crap. They might just not be finished or whatever. So when America was recording fairly regularly, yearly or every other year, I would usually just turn it over to Dewey. And I don't mean to just say it's his decision, but because I have opinions, but I'd let him pick through and see which ones resonated with him. So that was really the only criteria of what's a group song and what's a solo song. I would never hold a song back and say, oh, it can't be for the group, or vice versa. I don't think that way.
Yeah. Tickets to the Past is a track that does feature Dewey on the album.
Yeah.
Was there any hesitancy about putting that on the album?
No, and only because there wasn't really an America thing in the pipeline at the moment. If there had been another rarities or a collection or a box or something, I always try and save those things. If it involves both of us, then that's obviously the first place it would go. But there was nothing that was in the pipeline. In fact, the next thing that's coming out, it's a lovely project, but it is a Hollywood Bowl concert from 1975. And it's George Martin conducting the LA Philharmonic, and it's Dan Peet was still with us. Plus 75 by then on most of the hits. So it's a lovely package. but it wasn't the kind of thing that you could use. And here's some demos, here's some others.
Indy's, excuse me, Indy's Gatho is quite an evocative piece on the album, an instrumental. Was that always going to be an instrumental, and what was the inspiration behind it?
I love instrumentals, and I often write them. I ended up with a half a dozen or so from this project or this batch of writing. But Indy, you know what a gatho is, an Aussie term that you have slang for everything, and a gatho is a gathering. And my youngest stepdaughter is 18 now, but she was having a gatho, having a gang of friends over. I was working on this song, and it was a nice little acoustic thing, and I could hear them. Now, I don't want to confirm or deny, but I think there might have been some vodka involved with the kids. It was getting very loud, and it actually started sounding really good with the guitar I was playing. So I snuck downstairs with my phone and I recorded some of them screaming and yelling. And so that's why it's called Indy's Gather. In the middle of the song, you hear a bunch of kids screaming and stuff.
Yeah, it's quite cinematic. Have you ever been asked to score a film? And if not, is that something you'd be interested in?
I would love to. The short answer is I really had the time. It's a commitment that I would never treat it lightly. Very happy when songs that we have done have been used in movies or certain scenes in TV shows. There's a long list of that. But for example, I give a credit on this album to Gustavo Santaolalla, who's one of my favorite all-time composers. He's an Argentinian guy. He won back-to-back Oscars for Brokeback Mountain and Babel. And I met him a few years ago, and I sent him this track because I just thought it was kind of inspired by him and stuff. And I got a very positive reaction, and I was hoping he might play a little bit of he plays a variety of instruments, but there's a particular South American stringed instrument that he plays beautiful. But anyway, we couldn't put it together. He was, during COVID, he was kind of locked away in his Argentinian winery or something. But yes, that whole era, I'm a fanatic of Morricone and stuff, so that shows up sometimes in the instrumentals. I just think it's a beautiful avenue. Obviously in film and TV, a lot of times music is just purely background, don't get in the way, but there are other times just beautiful examples of, this is the ultimate sensual experience because visual and musical, you know what I mean? Everything.
Yeah, I love the affected bass sound on the track I Fall Down. Whose idea was that, and what was going on pedal-wise?
I'm trying to think if I could give you an actual technical example. I can't remember. I think it's a baritone through a fuzz and some tremolo. Is that what it is? Yeah, I think so.
Sounds like it. Yeah.
It's a baritone. Since Wichita Lineman, down, 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 down. In fact, I love baritone. I love the range of that instrument. I'm Taylor, I'm an endorsee of Taylor guitars. They're making me a baritone at the moment, so might get a few more songs out of that.
Your press release also says that you can find your main musical influences on this album, the 3 Bs, the Beatles, Beach Boys, and Bee Gees. You've often spoken about the Beatles and the Beach Boys, but not so much about the Bee Gees. What was it about the Bee Gees that you loved?
Well, everything. I mean, there's an incredible arc to that career, and talk about a chameleon of a bunch of guys. I think that they don't get bundled in the same, because Beatles and Beach Boys were 60s. They were a much earlier time, which was for Dewey and I the formidable years when everything's really getting planted deeply. But that whole first batch of stuff that was collected, there was very early Bee Gees' greatest hits, but it had things like Holiday and New York Mining Disaster and stuff. It's just one of my favorite albums of all time. Not that I didn't like the albums that each of those songs came from, but when you hear them back to back, we actually did Mining Disaster in America, the first few months of America playing. And from that, the Dewey song Sandman came from that kind of A minor strumming thing from Bee Gees. So they've been an influence for years. It just didn't go quite as far back as Beatles and Beach Boys.
Yeah, the song Tears from your album is very much has a Bee Gees influence.
Yeah. Well, there was a time when our manager was actually managing Barry and Robin, and I thought, oh, this would be so great. And I remember there was a couple that were clearly influenced, and I was trying to get to him to see if he'd be interested. But by that point in his career, he'd produced everybody from Streisand to Kenny Rogers, and just And I think I got a very nicely worded, you know, Godspeed, young man, kind of thing, like, which was a pass, but would have loved to. There's a guy that I wish I could have hooked up with over the years.
Yeah. So what was the core studio band for this album?
Core studio band was me. If you go to the credits, I played a lot of the instruments, and with technology, you can obviously have people play from afar and send you files and stuff, which is a lovely option that we didn't used to have. But also, if I play everything, I know exactly what I'm going to do, and I know where that bass note's going to go and stuff. And I like to use as the example when Brian Wilson was in the kind of leading up to Pet Sounds, and when he was really doing these immensely involved arrangements, he wasn't playing any of it, but he was writing every note. The organs, you play these 8 notes, and the bass, Carol Kay on the bass. So there's a great example of it. It was one mind and one concept. But because he'd included all of LA's best musicians, you can clearly hear that kind of Wrecking Crew influence,
Yeah. You've spoken about the Taylor guitars that you use and the Rickenbacker. What about the piano? What kind of piano do you use in recording?
Well, now I use digital pianos more for the convenience, but I had for many years, it's kind of a strange story. How do you misplace a grand piano? But a lovely Yamaha G3 with 6 foot, and it's just a lovely grand piano. And people who play pianos, they're all so different, and it really not only depends on the instrument, it depends on the acoustics of the room that you're in. Just considering getting a real piano again. We've just moved in Venice to a lovely house. I'm not sure there's room for a grand piano, but certainly an upright would fit nicely in there.
Yeah, because you released or wrote around 40 songs during the pandemic, and does that mean we might see another solo album anytime soon?
Every time I do one of these, you have to kind of reassess the whole. What are we trying to say, or what are we trying to? It's pointless to say never say never. And each time I do one, I think, oh boy, that was a lot of work. But give it a year or so. I would like to work some more in the instrumental. Maybe we're trying to cut back on the touring schedule, so maybe getting a little bit more time at my own disposal, I might be able to get into scoring a little bit more, which would be nice.
Yeah. Well, what about bucket list projects? Are there things in the back of your mind that you want to get to one day?
To be honest, I have done so much that's on that list from a very early in our arc. I got to know Jimmy Webb, good friends with Brian Wilson, worked with George Martin. These were bucket list things when you're a teenager, and these are the major influences. That list is far shorter now, but I don't consider that a bad thing. I just think I consider that a life well lived. I'd like to travel a bit more with my wife. So much of my life was eaten up from here to there doing shows that a lot of times it's places you've been to for one day and you'd love to go back. So there's a list of places I'd like to revisit.
Yeah. Speaking of traveling, I mean, you're back in Venice. Last time I was in Venice, the extent of the homelessness really struck me. Do you fear for the future of America, or are you still optimistic?
I fear more than I used to. I'd like to think that these things are cyclical. The little about American politics, even when Obama was president, he got crushed in the midterms. These things swing back and forth. But unfortunately, we are now in an undeniably severe case of swinging back and forth. I call it a checkerboard country really now, because you'll have states with rights right up against another state that's completely the opposite. And this is no longer a Mason-Dixon line, south and north. This is checkerboard over the whole country. So it's a sad thing, to be honest. It's a sad state, and we wish all of our fellow Americans the best, and hope we can find common ground and try and put a lot of this behind us.
Yeah. So what's on for the rest of 2022, and will we see America back in Australia?
There's no dates in Australia. You'll see me at the end of August, because I'm going to be down there. We have a trip in Japan. I have a book of photography later in the year that's a lovely project, and we'll go there for a few weeks. But other than that, I'm planning to be down at Bronte most mornings if I can.
Well, Gerry, it's been great to talk to you again. Aurora is a beautiful album, and hopefully we'll get to chat again.
Thank you, Greg. Anytime. Pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye.